everyone. This colloquium. I'm sure Yogesh doesn't need any introduction, but since it's a formal sort of a setting, I would just read out a brief bio of Yogesh. Dr. Yogesh Snehi teaches history at the School of Liberal Studies, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. He has been a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, from 2013 to 2015. Dr. Snehi's major teaching and research interests focus on the Punjab region. That includes debates on religion formation, gender, and the sacred spaces of religious shrines. Dr. Snehi's PhD was an exploration of the circumstances that led to the emergence of unique trajectories of Himachal Pradesh and Haryana since their reorganization in 1966, despite their historical backwardness. He has published on this theme in various journals and books, including Economic and Political Weekly, Indian Economic and Social History Review, and Oxford University Press. Dr. Snehi has also published a monograph titled Specializing Popular Sufi Shrines in Punjab, Dreams, Memories, Territoriality. I hope the talk that you're delivering today is part of.
Yes, this is drawn
from the book. He's also co-edited a book titled Modernity and Changing, collaborative project of the Farmers Movement Archive. More recently, he did a collaborative project on the Farmers Movement Archive, a neighborhood history project for Abohar, that's in Punjab, and a joint project on vernacular cosmopolitanisms. He's currently working on a collaborative book project titled, very interesting, Keywords for Punjab. Is it already in the?
No,
it's still in process.
Yeah, it will take a long time.
But it's interesting. Okay, so I now invite Dr. Yogesh Snehi to deliver his talk, and we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Vikram, and I hope I am audible to whosoever is joining online. You see, this work has most of it that I'll be presenting, though part of it is kind of enrichment of some of the work that I've already published. And it basically also draws from a lecture that I delivered at the Indian Institute Congress recently, wherein I touched upon some of the questions around how to make sense of our understanding of sacred spaces. Now, in this particular talk, which is I'm not kind of structured, because if I stick too much to the text, then I end up shooting beyond my prescribed limit. So I'll be kind of sharing my recollections of what this work has been about, and also I'll share some slides about this particular shrine that I will be talking about, just one that I have chosen for today's understanding. Now, to give a background of what this work intended to be. Actually, in the morning today, I returned from IIT, which is conducting an interesting workshop today on music, sounds, and what you call film studies on Punjab region. And we had Ajay Bhardwaj and Gurvinder Singh and others who are part of this workshop today. One of the things that emerged from the conversation that I attended in the first half was about how difficult it is to box northwestern region of India into very clearer categories. And that's a feature it shares with what Thakur would also want to call the borderlands. Particularly the western borderlands of India do offer us a unique possibility of investigating their social processes, which seem to be following a very distinctive territory as against a gadgetic based, cultures and civilization. However, I'm not going to delve into the nitty-gritties and the deeper details of this distinctiveness, and I'll try to focus more on the subject that I have at hand, and that is this question of why is it that Sufi shrines continue to persist despite Muslims predominantly migrating to Pakistan during 1947. Now, if you look at the demographic making of the Punjab today, as I've also mentioned in the abstract, it is predominantly a Sikh-dominated province, with urban population dominating, Hindus dominating the urban areas, and Sikhs dominating in the rural areas. The other important feature of this particular process is that we do have one anomaly in this particular process, which is we have one significant pocket of Muslim population in this place, which is now a significant, city called Malerkotla, where you have an interesting feature of a set of Muslim population which doesn't migrate to Pakistan because the princely state chooses to stay back in India. So during the partition riots, during the partition killing, gruesome killing actually, this was the only refuge for Muslims migrating to Pakistan, because everywhere else you would be killed. But if you enter Malerkotla, nobody will touch you. So that distinctiveness in a way also makes the partition as a process very, unique, the way it manifests. When you look at Malerkotla as one of the examples of a Muslim state refusing to partition. I'm not saying it because several scholars have written about it, and Abigilo predominantly, who has worked on this particular city, and she uses in one of the articles, Malerkotla, who refuses partition. That's what she articulates it as. But my focus, and this is a region which has, if you look at the pre-partition context, has also been investigated by scholars like Harjot Oberoi, who in his seminal work paid attention to non-affiliatory religious practices, which means Sikhs going to shrines of Sufi saints and the temples dedicated to Devis, and Hindus again similarly going to Peer shrines. So the context and the practice, particularly that he looks on, particularly Sikh practices, he tries to argue that the contour of Sikh practice before the 1947, although his focus is more on early 20th century and the late 19th, was defined by a different process. But then with social religious reform movements which come to dominate this particular region, you had what he calls construction of a religious boundary, wherein Sikhi or Sikhness get to be emphasized more and more prominently, as was the Hinduness being emphasized elsewhere. But despite all this, after 1947, when all this happened, huge mass migration, huge number of killings, I belong to a town which, together with Amritsar, were places of huge massacres, because these are the two important trains which used to pass, one from my own city, one from Amritsar directly to Pakistan. One was from Firozpur also. So these were sites of gruesome massacre. In fact, there were occasions when I used to interview, I remember a gentleman, not a gentleman actually, but then a person whom I interviewed who had his shop just right opposite to my father's shop, and this was quite some time ago. And the family belonged to a family of freedom fighters. Yeah? And you had this character, when I was interviewing him, he actually boasted to have killed hundreds of Muslims single-handedly. And the other, his relatives were very embarrassed at the statement that he made, but he was unapologetic about having killed so many Muslims. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you look at 1947, and this is not the tale that I'm narrating it, I met people in conferences from Pakistan, because you can't call them here, and they similarly share similar kind of stories from their villages, from their towns, where Muslims there proudly proclaim that single-handedly they killed so many Hindus and Sikhs. So it's a story which is kind of replicated and from either side of the border. Now it will be interesting to see what happens on the other side of the border post the partition, but I'm not focusing there. My focus is on here. There are different trajectories actually Pakistan takes. We have Ambar Ibadat, who has recently authored a book on what is left of Sufism in Pakistan, say for instance, focusing on how state institutionalizes kind of shrines and state control takes over the major historic shrines, and how does it transform Pakistan in the process. And similarly of Sikh institutions, the Hindu institutions, which completely, except for Sikh institutions which continue to flourish in a way, you have industry institutions, except for the major ones like Katasraj and others, which survived in a way because of intervention of the legislative and other court processes there. But you have other set of shrines, temples and otherwise, which today are in very bad state. But if you look at the Punjab case on the Indian side, you do see post the 1947 a new kind of nuance emerging. And it's a slow gradual process. It's of different phases that you come across. I try to identify 2-3 stages of it. The first stage is of the period or the decade immediately after partition, when the Sufi shrines which had been abandoned by Muslims who migrated to Pakistan continue to remain desolate, with nothing in place in a way, majorly. But then we do have, and I will come back to this point also later, shrines, a number of shrines which were never, you see, under the control of Muslims. Sufi shrine I'm talking about. So you had shrines dedicated to Peers, Lakhdata, particularly in this case, a very popular Peer figure in Punjab, whose memorial shrines were spread across Punjab, most of which were also visited by the Baniya community. So it was actually Agrawal Samaj who was strongly associated with Baba Lakhdata shrines. If time allows, I can come back to some of these nuances. And similarly, you had Hindu Khatri shrines, again known as Nigahah shrines, dedicated to Baba Lakhdata, which were always Hindu shrines. Hindu in the sense that they were dedicated to Peer, but kind of controlled by the Hindu Khatris. You have plethora of examples of Jat Sikhs endowing shrines, funding shrines and their practices, which again was one of the are among several cases of where shrines survived despite partition, which means there's a continuity that you come across. In fact, Ajay Bhardwaj was mentioning today in the talk that I attended that in Fabara you had an interesting data of Sufi mystics, which was always deeply associated with Dalit practice, which again didn't experience partition. So you do have, you see, a large spectrum of shrines which were under non-Muslim control, and therefore shrine practices continue. But there were fewer in numbers. The larger spectrum of shrines spread across urban and rural settings. They are not in dozens, they are not in hundreds, they are in thousands. Because every rural area invariably has such shrine, irrespective of the fact that village was a Hindu-dominated village or a Muslim-dominated village or a Sikh-dominated village. If you come to the Haryana region, you have lesser number of such spaces, but at least in the Punjab region, where also the Islamic influence of a very different kind proliferated, you had these shrines in urban and rural centers all across. And there were thousands in numbers that we are talking about. So during the first decade, you have them remaining desolate. In the second decade, you see some of the shrines starting to get populated again. And there are different patterns, no unique pattern that you can identify. Very localized pattern emerge where some set of individuals come together to restore these shrines.
And this is post-independence.
Post-independence period. Now, the interesting feature of this process was, it was Sufi shrines which were predominantly being, you see, restored of their practices, because we had, when Muslims left, their houses, their graveyards, and also mosques, and taqiyas as they're known, khanqahs of living Sufis. There are large spectrum of such shrines also existed. But it was only in the case of grave shrines, I am saying, grave in the sense where you have tombstones, where you had dargahs, which survived the process of partition. Everything else was transformed. The graveyards were leveled up, colonies came up on those graveyards because you had housing crisis, you don't know where to settle people. The proportion of migration was very skewed. Number of people coming into Punjab was much higher as compared to, you see, the land available in this part of the region. And therefore you see Punjabi Hindus and Sikhs were migrated and settled in all parts of India. Every town of UP became a settlement colony. If you know the statistics of it and explore, and Pallavi will know it better. And similarly you had these settlements spreading across Bombay, Gujarat, Rajasthan, you have Madhya Pradesh, spread across all the areas. So mosques were converted into temples and gurdwaras, and they are surviving till today as officially waqf property, but we have gurdwaras and temples inside these mosques. In my own hometown, we had this mosque whose minar, two beautiful minars, were demolished to kind of remove any sign of it being Muslim shrine otherwise there before partition, and a temple institution functions from there. But as I am saying, dargahs were an exception. They were exception because these continued to function post the first decade, when it remained desolate, as Sufi shrines. The character or centrality of the Sufi saint and mystic in these shrines continue to define that particular process. What I want to put it if you want. And that process actually, in a way, is central to the way the argument that I am trying to make here. Is what makes Sufi shrines particularly significant. Answer to this partly I have already given to you, which is that veneration and association to Sufi-Saint shrines was always diverse, was not specific to religious affiliations before the partition, and therefore you already had a significant memory of Hindu and Sikh association with Sufi shrines even before partition. In fact, Richard Eaton, when he wrote one of his earliest articles actually, titled Court of Man, Court of God. In this article, he explores a case of infighting between the two set of Sadar machines at the shrine of Babakari, where the matter went to the court, and this was in early 1930s. The matter went to the court, and the dispute was around obviously who would be the next Sadar machine and who has the bigger claim over Sadar machine. The case was resolved, an existing Sadar machine got the case, but therein he makes a reference of the Starbandi ceremony, which was apparently attended by a lot of non-Muslims also. The Starbandi was a ceremony when you pass on the pagadi to the next successor, and in that Starbandi ceremony he mentions the non-Muslims who attend. He uses the word attend the shrine, and he also mentions, however, that they attend out of civic responsibilities because they being important individuals of the city. And he kind of bypasses the possibility of Hindu association with Sufi institutions, because his rubric is about Islamization. His rubric was about a kind of a slow gradual process in essentially wherein you see most people will become Muslim. So that is the trajectory he generally follows in the latter articles that he also about Jat becoming Islamized in the process of spread of Sufi and mysticism and otherwise. So therefore, the Hindu association or the Sikh association with Sufistic shrine were post the 1947 either looked upon as a symbol of pluralism, syncretism, or living together and tolerance. That was the major kind of trope used by at least the historiography that we come across about the Sikh and Hindu association with Sufi shrines. It didn't explain whether or not there was a historical process because of which these associations developed. It used it as a proof of tolerance. In fact, post the 1947, because there was this huge anxiety about how to resolve the communal politics, how to resolve the violence that India experienced in 1947, Punjab experienced in 1947. So there was always this throwback or kind of look back into the past, wherein the present concerns were inscribed into past in a sense of possibly resolving the problems of the past to kind of create a future or the present for the Indian nation state. And therefore, as B.D. Chattopadhyay calls, in context of obviously early India, that there were a priori assumptions used to qualify past and to look for tolerance in identities of, emperors like Akbar as against Aurangzeb, and to look at Ashoka as against some other, pre-colonial or pre-modern Indian emperor. So these kind of superimposition and looking for possibilities of question of tolerance became a kind of an a priori ahistorical exercise in the context and contours of the Indian formation of the historiography post the Indian nation state formation in post 1947. And I am going to question that, because these premises are based on first a presumption of religious identities being fixed, a presumption of religious institutions being centers exclusive to religious practices and religious identities. That is not the case that I am trying to make. I am trying to make the case for the essential practices, practices being essentially mixed. And I am using Northwestern as a case to make this particular argument because Northwestern India definitely provides you a possibility of looking beyond what the politics of the Gangetic Plain, because Gangetic Plain politics have been overemphasized a lot into an understanding of the pre-colonial context and also the colonial context. And I do believe that Northwestern region presents us with the possibility of correcting those set of formulation, and those set of formulations are about how do you perceive, remember, these questions of tolerance. Or in fact, I was reading this translation of Amir Khusro's couplets, Persian ghazals by Sunil Kumar, and I've forgotten the name of the other editor. And Sunil Kumar, in the introduction to the couplet, it's a Penguin publication. Sunil Kumar. Delhi University. So Sunil Kumar in that introduction actually refers to Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb. Again, using the same a priori assumption of a tehzeeb pre-existing. Tehzeeb something which is so natural to the Ganga Jamni. So the historiography post the partition has actually been very prone to these assumptions, very prone to these articulations of looking for, you see, reconciling the past by using tools which are the need of the present and which are not historical tools, remember. And that creates a problem for, at least for me, because the kind of shrines that I encounter did not explain this particular process. So the question arises, one, why is it that the shrine post the partition, particularly after the first decade post the partition, start to regenerate themselves in absence of Muslim caretakers? Because as I'm saying, predominant number of these shrines were now being controlled by the non-Muslim caretakers. And they came from a variety of religious affiliation as well as caste affiliations. And therefore, because of this complexity, it was very difficult to say whether these are Hindu caretakers, there are Sikh caretakers, are they Mazhabi caretakers or Dalit caretakers. In some cases, I came across Kumhar caretakers, which the case study that I will talk about today. So you don't have a much complex spectrum wherein inscribing a particular religion or a caste onto rejuvenation of the shrines was a very difficult enterprise because they were very diverse and each of them had a different manifestation depending on where they were located. So space became a very important dynamic for me when I was looking at them because there was no other way I could find. One, obviously Punjab is space in the larger contour of the nationalist historiography, in the nationalist imagination, but also as region within the region, cities and villages within the region because they are very unique. You have Rajput villages, you have Dalit villages, you have Pathan villages, you have Jat Sikh villages, you have Ramgarhia villages, you have all kinds of villages actually. So to be able to define a singular kind of process which would explain the trajectory of these rejuvenation was very difficult. The problem became even more complex actually when I landed in Amritsar in 2006. I got a job there, my first permanent job, very special, a horrible place however, but the college. But Amritsar, because that was a city I had known and been familiar, like most of us, because we often hear about it all the time. Because of Golden Temple, because of Jallianwala Bagh, because of Wagah border. We are quite used to listening about Amritsar in those kind of, settings. So either nationalist or Sikh inheritance. These are the two major trajectories. Indian nation state, the third practice. If you look at, locate Sikh temple or Darbar Sahib and the Sikh institution, Jallianwala Bagh as a nationalist institution, and the Wagah border as kind of a nationalist enterprise. Remember, post the 1947. But when I landed there, a lot of myths that I have about Amritsar started to collapse actually. The reason for that was because I landed there for the first time. I was 2006. I was like 27, 28-year-old. I landed in a place which I realized I hardly know sufficiently. Though I, as a historian, probably had read about a lot about it as a student of history, but I absolutely got confused in that space. One, that as against my expectation, it turned out to be a non-Sikh city. The predominant population of Amritsar was Hindu. Though, you see, in our historical memory, we often describe it as a city of Sikh veneration. Since 2006, because our college was in the walled city, the college was known as earlier as Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College. It was a Muslim institution. And interestingly, the college would often invoke Faiz Ahmad Faiz because Faiz used to teach English there. So the college was very conscious of its Muslim inheritances. They would often invoke, oh, Faiz taught here. Anybody new historian would come, okay, Faiz taught here. And Faiz also comes back in 1960s there to visit college. Thereafter, obviously, doesn't survive for long. But an important memory is inscribed about the Muslim inheritance of the city. And it is only while I was living there that I realized, I started to read more about the city because I wanted to know what the city is. I read this work by Anand Gaba, only exceptional work which talks about Amritsar before the 1947. And she opened up a new world for me because I realized that this city was predominantly Muslim city before partition. As unlike our presumption of being first Sikh city, contemporary Hindu city, pre-partition was a Muslim city. And it had a particular kind of, you see, division of the city space because the walled city had predominantly Hindu and Sikh population with pockets of Muslim population here and there. And then you have Muslim population predominantly living in the periphery of the walled city because there were a lot of Kashmiri artisan communities. It was known for textile production, the city even pre-partition. So you have a lot of immigrant Muslims who used to live in the city. And one of those families also were of Manto because he also used to live in that city. He used to live in a small house near Katra Jebel Singh, which was inside the walled city. And when Aisha Jalal visits that particular place to revisit, because Aisha is a niece of Manto, and she visits that place to find out where Manto used to live inside the walled city, she was told that the entire mohalla of the Muslims was burned down during partition because Manto left in 1936 to Bombay and then he became part and parcel of a different world altogether. But that house where he used to live, the entire Muslim locality within the walled city was completely burned down during partition. Now the important question that I wanted to raise is that you have had these kinds of memories on the one hand, and then you have a context and contour that I experienced in Amritsar immediately, particularly after around 2006, which present a very different world for me. What is this different world? You had Sufi shrines right inside the walled city. Not just few, several of them. In 2007, I record the celebration of first urs dedicated to Baba Lakhdata. First, which means after the partition, you see, right inside the walled city, at the telephone exchange chowk, which is like 100 meters from Golden Temple. And I record it. Now, I come across a world which again defies logic. Defies logic because at least in the dominant common sense, that is not what's supposed to happen because Muslims are supposed to be kept out. In the context of the memory that we are talking about, huge violence, where complete localities of Muslims are burned down. Why are Muslim shrines surviving? When I say Muslim, I'm saying about Sufi shrines. And their practices, you see, flourishing because immediately post the 1992 particularly, I'm just putting a rough date around it, but around the mid-90s, it was not just the practices that I was coming across. There were a large number of shrines emerging, new shrines emerging in Punjab, dedicated to Sufi saints. And I tried to expand my scope to look at this diverse spectrum of spaces once I started to explore Amritsar. I came across shrine dedicated to Khwaja Khizr, shrine dedicated to Baba Farid, shrine dedicated to Sakhi Sarwar, Lalla Wala Peer, shrine dedicated to Guga, again, a very popular figure from Rajasthan or Rajputana. And I started to come across these diverse spectrum of spaces which within the so-called Hindu spheres existed historically. And so it's not about I'm saying that these are not the spaces that I'm saying that suddenly have appeared. They have continued to appear. They were there before the partition. As against the claim made by, remember, Ian Talbot and some others who had actually recorded interviews of prominent Arya Samajis, which clearly defined separation between Hindus and Muslims. That is not what I encountered. I encountered overlap. I encountered intermixing. I encountered complexity of the process. And this led me to look at a diverse spectrum of spaces. Just close to Amritsar, when you go towards the southern part of Punjab, you land at a place called Makhu. Makhu is a place where I saw in front of my own eyes a new khanqah Chishtiya emerging. It is called Khanqah Chishtiya, which is a replica of Ajmer Sharif actually. Exact replica of Ajmer Sharif. Of same size, same kind of edifice that you can imagine. And new set of such spaces were emerging elsewhere in Punjab. Now that was puzzling because during the period of militancy, as I started to record, these very shrines were also, you see, momentarily prone to targets by Sikh militants. You had Sadharnisheens who were killed. I came across one Sadharnisheen, a Hindu Khatri from Moga, who was killed by the militants. And the argument was that you can't run this shrine. It was dedicated to Baba Lakhjata because a lot of Sikhs come there and you better close it. I had examples from close to Ropar shrine where again, at Majri and close to Ropar where Sadharnishin was killed. You had what you call a Mazhabi Sikh who was associated with the shrine at yet another shrine close to Ropar who was killed during the militancy period. That particular shrine was also bombed. So you did have multiple reasons for which again shrines are target of militant violence. And you see, you don't talk about these things in the history of Punjab. You talk about militancy only either through perspective of the Indian state, of being, you see, hegemonically kind of suppressing Golden Temple, using violence as a tool to suppress militancy, or you try to understand it through Sikh militant discourse of being victims. But you don't talk about other victims. You don't talk about how militancy targeted Hindus, how militancy targeted, you see, Sufi shrines. That is what you don't talk about. So you do have actually, therefore, a more puzzlement emerging in front of me, because of which actually my understanding of these spaces became even more, you see, complex. And I didn't understand, I didn't realize how to make sense of it. Frankly speaking, I didn't know what to do with these. I had a continued interest in it, and the continued interest was also a chance encounter. Because during my first job in 2005, my students forced me to take them to a shrine called Panchpir at Bohar, my hometown, on which I wrote an article later. And it is through that shrine that a new world opened for me. And job in Amritsar actually kind of consolidated several of these ideas that I had in my mind. Now, the important thing is, how do you historically document that process? Because you have this diverse spectrum of shrines. None of them fitted into a singular frame. You didn't have Sufi silsilas which were functional anymore. Because you did have in Punjab major influence of shrine from Pakistan, like of Fariduddin Gandhi Shakkar or Baba Farid Nun, whose shrine was in Pakpatan. You had influence of Lahore-based shrines, a set of shrine by, I remember, of Sufi, particularly Qadri and Chishti Sufi mystics in Lahore. You had influence from Uch and Bahawalpur of the Sohrawardi Sufi orders. So it did have influences on Punjab, on this part of Punjab, a major shrines of which were now in Pakistan. So in terms of also major shrine, except for Malerkotla shrine that you come across, major shrines of Sufi-Saint mystics were left in Pakistan. So you didn't have any existing branch of mysticisms. You didn't have existing branch of the silsilas, through which also you will be able to explain this process. But then I realized that there did exist a kind of influence from Kaliyar, There did emerge an influence from Kalia Sharif, which is in, remember, western UP. Kalia is a place. Roorkee, yes. Of the Chishti Sabri order into the Punjab region more recently, in the last few decades. And that played a functional role because remember, Sabir Park, whose shrine is based in Kalia, was actually the nephew of Baba Farid. If you look at Baba Farid's genealogy, it was spread across a large number of regions. You look at Nizam Dinolia, was a disciple of Baba Farid. You have now Kalia Sharif, a nephew of Baba Farid. So you do have an influence of Farid, and that influence played a pivotal role in reinstituting some of the practices in certain shrines of Punjab. And this became a unique process. In a way, Chishti Sabri revivalism was also taking place in Punjab's contours. But this revivalism was not being again done by what has been accused by a lot of radical Sikh historiography, by the immigrant bhaiyas. The immigrant bhaiyas in the sense of the use, remember, more pejoratively because referring to people coming from eastern UP and Bihar region, they are referred to bhaiya in Punjab, derogatorily, remember. And it has been accused by several of these Sikh radicals that these are the people who are going to demographically transform Punjab and this and that. As against that particular claim, these practices actually got rejuvenated by the communities from Punjab, not the immigrant communities. So you don't have actually a unique process which was getting instituted in this particular enterprise. And I'll give you a small snippet of it before we come back to some discussion on this particular issue. And this is about a shrine, just a moment. Okay, I'm just trying to open it. Not responding. Okay. So this shrine that I am referring to is actually a historical shrine. And I've chosen this for a particular reason. I'll explain that process. As I already told you, there are new shrines emerging. And this is a very obvious process that you will be able to understand through this case study also. Now this shrine is very close to Patiala. And remember, Patiala as a princely state was very notorious for partition violence, as against many other princely states like Bahawalpur in Pakistan, like Faridkot in Punjab. The Patiala state rolled into the entire partition
online presentation is something.
I don't know what is slowing down.
Anyway,
So now this particular shrine is known as Kadam Sharif. Kadam is, if you look at, it's actually a historical site. It's a historical site. It was an archaeological site known as Gurram. It's in close to Patiala, the city of Patiala. It's just kind of half an hour drive from Patiala. It's still running actually. Still loading.
The screen is gone.
The screen is gone.
So this is the shrine that I am referring to, close to Patiala. Now the shrine is very interesting because, as I said, it was located in a village which was constituted of predominantly Muslim communities, and these Muslim communities that I am referring to, I could also draw the names of the communities. I'll come back to it maybe. Predominantly of prosperous Kambo Muslims. Kambo, or basically a carpenter castes in Punjab. And in addition to the Kambo, the village also had, I'm talking about pre-partition, the Mistri, Mughal, Khoja, Lohar, Peja, Teli, and Dhobi community from among the Muslim community. The only non-Muslim community that we had were actually of the lower caste among the Hindu communities, Kumhars, and then Dalits among the Mazhabis, Chamars, who are today known as Ravidasyas, and Chudas, known also as Balmikis and Harijans, who lived there in this particular village. So, in fact, when partition took place, these were the only connect that you had between pre and post partition context of these set of lower caste community, which were in minority, small community of them which lived here. And the place is interesting, and you see this is a small gateway to the shrine, as you will see. It is dedicated to this saint figure known as Vikram Shah, a Chishti Sabri saint figure from this very region. Now, Vikram Shah, if I go back to his genealogy, died in early 18th century, a Chishti Sabri saint, and he is basically, is it visible? Okay, it is.
The signs there.
Right, the signs there. He was,
GIM.
oh yes, it's called, where?
Welcome.
GIM, welcome. Yamira Peak, which is on top, and then following by that you have GIM. Yamira Peak and then GIM. Now the legend is, remember the story is very interesting. Who is Vikram Shah? Now, Vikram Shah, basically a Chishti Sabri saint from the 17th century of the Chishti Sabri origin. And his genealogies are varied. I'm not going to the detail of the genealogies, but the interesting part is the story is that one day, and this actually is very super inscribed into shrine. And as soon as you enter the shrine, you have in both in Urdu, in Hindi, as well as Gurumukhi script, 3 set of huge stone slabs where the story, life narrative of Vikram Shah is super inscribed. So as soon as you enter, you encounter, you remember these marble slabs that you can, I'm quoting from there. So there is this legend about Vikram Shah that one day he was offering prayers, but instead of looking towards the west, yani performing sajda looking towards west, he is facing the east and performing sajda. To which his murids are confused. What is he doing? Has he gone mad? And therefore he questioned him, okay, why is it that you're offering prayer looking towards the east? To which he says, a new sun has been born in east, therefore I'm looking towards the east. And to kind of address their concerns, he said, let's take a journey. But before taking a journey, he carries 2 bowls of kheer, one from a house of a Hindu, one from a house of a Muslim, along with him. That's the story. I don't kind of decode the story too much. So he carries these 2 bowls of kheer, one from a house of Hindu and another from the house of a Muslim, and embarks on a journey to Patna. Now, at Patna, during this period actually, and this is I'm talking about the 17th century, Guru Tegh Bahadur, who was the father of Guru Gobind Singh, was actually living there at that point of time. They had actually taken refuge there because Mughal pressure on Punjab had significantly increased, because of which, remember, for several reasons. The Sikh Gurus retreated towards Patna and they found a safe space for them. Now, what happens that when they reach Patna, he insists on meeting Bal Gobind. Actually, Guru Gobind Singh was born, and because Guru Gobind Singh was born, the story narrates that Vikram Shah offered the player looking towards the east. So his uncle refused, no, it's a stranger, who is this stranger, I won't allow my son to be visited. But then he insists, no, I've come from Punjab. Ultimately, Vikram Shah is able to meet him. And what happens in them that Bal Gobind touches both his hands, covers both the bowl of kheer which are offered by Vikram Shah, and Vikram Shah proclaims, oh, he'll be the protector of Muslims and Hindus. So this is a story which is inscribed into the village, memory of this particular village. The important thing is what happens to this village post-partition. This is the map of contemporary Punjab. If you look at this village, the village is right down there, highlighted, Kadam, or Koda as it is known, close to Haryana, on the edge of Patiala. Now, if you visit this village, you have this huge complex of shrine known as Kadam Sharif, which is today, as I said, under the caretaking of 2 Kumhar, two people from Kumhar community. Both are married each other, and they were the ones who used to live in this place pre-partition. So they become the important link between pre and the post partition. Post the partition, actually, you have not even a single Muslim living in the village. A lot of people who come and occupy the village are predominantly Sikh, and these Sikh who are Jat and Rajput Sikhs migrated from Gujarat, Sialkot and Lalkot district of the Punjab post the partition. So we get an instance of who are the people who are basically getting settled here. But the important thing is, so this is the Quran complex, as you see on the left. You have this huge archaeological mound. This is actually the archaeological mound I was talking about. And this is the shrine complex. But the important thing is actually this gurdwara, which is on the same road, access road to the shrine, which was established in 1965. Now, the story goes that when Vikram was able to meet Balgovind, he told apparently to Balgovind, look, I have grown old, I have come to meet you, but when you grow up, you come meet me. And apparently in 1965, local Sikhs came together to establish a gurdwara at a place apparently where Guru Gobind Singh came and met Vikram Shah. That gurdwara is known as Gurdwara Milap Sar. Milap in the sense of coming together. Gurdwara Milap. So this is the site of Gurdwara Milap Sar. So it's known as Gurdwara Shri Boli Sai, but popularly as Gurdwara Milap Sar. And each year, when Urs take place, it is ceremonial for, you see, Sajjada machines of the place to go and visit the Gurdwara premises. And it is also ceremonial for the Gurdwara institution also to continue to associate strong association with the Peer Shrine. The important thing, however, is that this particular shrine also undergoes certain changes. As you can see, the shrine had two mosques inside it, as you would know, because you see, as I said, it was predominantly Muslim village. Post the partition, it also underwent some structural transformation. So the door that you saw in the first slide, it opened into an open courtyard earlier. Open, which means it didn't have a ceiling. But now actually that courtyard is covered, large hall, it was converted into a large hall. On the left side of the hall, you have these, I'm just skipping some of these slides. This is the main gateway actually, that is the smaller gateway. This is the gateway that I showed you. So when you enter into this particular smaller entrance, on the one hand you encounter in front the gateway.
Sir, the slides are not showing.
That is because of internet speed, I can't help it. No. So one of the things that you encounter is a smaller gateway to actually this complex, which is the complex of the mausoleum. Typically the late Mughal era mausoleum were of two-storied. One was a place where the Sufi was actually buried, and one was a dummy actually on the top, as you see in Shah Jahan, Taj Mahal and elsewhere. So the complex that you entered, as soon as you entered, you actually went to the lower chamber of the complex. When you enter from the larger gate, you enter into the upper chamber of the complex, which looks like this, and this is the lower chamber where you enter. That's how the lower chamber shrine looks like. Now, if you look at this picture, the contemporary two Sajjada machines are these two set of individuals sitting in front, known as Bibi Mast Divani Polusha, and the male figure in the center who is known as Baba Mast Divana Bulesha. And behind him are Divane Varisha, who actually were the first one to start the practice and rejuvenate the practice at this particular shrine. And they kind of appear everywhere. These two individuals, and I'm telling you, they are from Muhar community. They are everywhere in the sense that you would see their presence not just in Quran, but it also on some of the major shrines in the Punjab region. They will appear in poster, they will appear in So these are towering figures, and they are not ordinary figures that we may want to understand. And they also, when you look at the sphere within Quran is situated, you should know that it's a predominantly agrarian, landscape. And you have a lot of Jats and agrarian communities coming, visiting, Dolesha, intervening within the problems that we have had. And the shrine also is an important center of celebration around birthday of Guru Gobind Singh. As you can see here, it's actually a poster. Let me just Guru Gobind Singh ji de janam tihade te lakh lakh badaiyan. And below it written Peer Vikram Shah ji apne murida naal Patna side jaake Bal Gobind de darshan karte the. So in basically narrating the visitation of Vikram Shah to Patna to visit Guru Gobind Singh, and you can see inscribed. In fact, the tale is powerful enough not to be ignored by the Punjab and Sindh Bank instituted and endowed, you see, project of drawing paintings of Sikh tradition. You don't see, and this is an exception actually, you don't see getting many Muslims represented in this project instituted by Punjab and Sindh Bank in 1970s. But this is one exception because Vikram Shah does appear in this figure. However, he's a figure which nowhere appears in Sikh historiography, nowhere. But in the painting project, it does appear in this painting. It's again from 1970s and early 80s. So, leaving aside, because I've already been told that I have to wind up, there are genealogies of a Brahmin, Daula, whose name was Roshan Daula, who converts to Islam, becomes disciple of, and become part and parcel of Mughal administration. He converts, and thereafter when he dies, he's actually graves and the graves of his family are just adjacent to, remember, the graves of Vikram Shah. That's how those associations start to get drawn. And every year you have this huge festival celebrated at the shrine. Now the important thing, however, is that these are a few mosques inside the shrine. Important thing is, however, that the shrine complex also got some new additions in the recent past. One of that addition was keeping of a Ramayana scripture inside. A room, as I said, when you enter the courtyard, you have this covered space now. On the right hand side of that covered space, we have a room where Ramayana has been kept. Now, obviously, these are much recent received developments. And then you also, you can see idols of all Hindu gods and goddesses inside, in addition to that. But you also have Guru Granth Sahib placed in one of the other rooms of the shrine complex. And a Granthi who apparently also organizes Bhaj inside regularly. And Guru Gobind Singh's personality being prominently displayed into this small Gurdwara complex. The shrine also organizes important Hindu festivals, as you can say. This is during the Janmashtami that they organize some events. So if you look at, therefore, its calendar events, the calendar event of the shrine are therefore today a mix of the festivities around Sikhs, Hindus and Muslims. Muslim in the say, remember I'm referring to it predominantly because of the Urs celebration, because death anniversary of Sufi-Saint is a prominent, remember, festivity around the shrine, where all kinds of Qawwali and many other celebrations take place. Now, the shrine is also a center of, you see, some festivals which have been kind of evoked as festivals to unite people. There's call for unity, Ekta Mela. The shrine has also become part and parcel of those enterprises. Also because, remember, as I said, the shrine has witnessed criticism by Shrominee Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee, a premier Sikh institution which governs Sikh Gurdwaras in Punjab, which has questioned the placement of Guru Granth Sahib in its premises. It said, no, you can't keep Guru Granth Sahib in a Sufi shrine. Despite the fact, remember, the shrine strongly invokes Guru Gobind Singh and his memory. But then, when I talked to these set of caretakers of the shrine, they said, okay, we resolved this by constructing a door which opens outside the shrine. In addition to the door which opens inside, a door outside, so that it can distinctively mark as a separate space. But Guru Granth Sahib continues to be placed there, and that part has not necessarily changed. This is from the Gurdwara Milapsar, some of these images, story, the narration, the same story that I narrated to you. It was inaugurated in 1965 and functions very distinctly. You should know that in Punjab you had two set of Gurdwaras. One set of Gurdwaras which are considered to be historical Gurdwaras, which are controlled by this statutory body instituted by the Sikh Gurdwara Act of 1925, known as Shrominee Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee. And then you have other set of Gurdwaras which are known as local Gurdwaras. Function more by some local managing committees or some institutions. So locally governed basically. They are not controlled by the SGPC. So this Gurdwara Milapsar is a non-SGPC Gurdwara. That distinction needs to be kept in mind to be understand. And in that Gurdwara you have Milap Sir, you have Guru Granth, and also the painting of apparently Vikram Shah meeting Guru Gobind Singh was grown up, came and visited. So I'll skip the rest of the part which is about the mound and the place, because the space also had these Ramayana legends actually associated with Kaushalya. I'll not go into the detail of some of these associations, and I'll probably open for more discussions. So what I want to end it with is to be able to understand the shrine and its spaces. One, that you may be tempted to look at it as proof of tolerance and a proof of syncretic association. These also kind of symbologies kind of attract us to invoke these set of claims. But these are not the sufficient ways that you can try to explain the process through which these spaces function. The process is very complex. It is quite a complex give and take. In their survival actually, it is historical memory which helps them. And that historical memory is not drawn by our romantic associations of coming together of two religious traditions. These are chance encounters, remember. And I've just given you one example of these chance encounters. There are dozens and dozens of these chance encounters, because of which Sikhs and Hindus associate themselves with Sufi shrines. And often these very stories are invoked. These very stories are memorialized wherever you go to these spaces and institutions. It is those chance encounters, which I call them organic encounters, which actually help us explain the process through which these shrines continue to survive and new ones emerge post the partition. Thank you very much. Just a moment. You were saying something?
The dargah we visited now.
No, this is not the one.
Remember once we had gone to that?
That was in Kurukshetra.
No.
Where?
Amritsar.
Oh, acha, Amritsar. Yes, we did visit one in Amritsar, but that's a different. That was Lahori Gate, small shrine institution, and Dalit
Which
College.
one we went to when Dennis had also gone? I don't know if it's the same.
Oh, Dennis would recall it. I don't recall. Which one did you visit Dennis in Amritsar? I don't remember. Oh.
Very familiar.
I'm sure, yes.
Okay, thank you, Yogesh. Thank you for this wonderful sort of presentation within such a limited time. I was quite fascinated actually by your presentation, because I've always seen these shrines. I'm not only in Punjab but also in other parts of North India. So whether it's Haryana, whether it's Himachal, but I've never actually thought about the way you have looked at these. For me, frankly, it had always been a symbol of syncretism, because it has always been, and which is an insufficient model as you rightly explained. His work actually explored the enduring presence and significance of Sufi saint shrines in Punjab, particularly after the aftermath of 1947 violence. Because I'm not a historian, but I had actually never thought. For me, there was a certain continuity that I had imagined. That 47 के पहले क्या हुआ है, immediately in the aftermath of the partition क्या हो रहा है क्या नहीं. But for me, it always existed, and this might be the fact that the kind of shrines that I've visited have always been there. They have not been disturbed by the violence, so whether it is Nizamuddin, or whether it is. And I had looked at the other side. For instance, there were various Muslims that I know of who refused to go to the other side, to the land of Punjab from this side, citing that how can we go? हमारे पीर मुर्शिद तो हमारे पीर और मुर्शिद यहीं पे दफन हैं, so we cannot go, and they refused to go to the other side. So thank you for bringing to attention this important sort of side to it. His work also critically examined existing historical models of religious encounter, like you ended your talk with syncretism and tolerance, and how these are insufficient models to explain this persistence of veneration, right? We actually need to move beyond this. And we also need to take into account the forces that brought the syncretism in the first place, perhaps, if we were to understand this veneration post 1947. Okay, I have two, slightly different questions that perhaps you did not, perhaps it's beyond the scope of your work. But primarily, and this is my interaction with the Sufi philosophy, which has been through music, right? So a lot of shrines do. So whether it is Nakodar festival or many other festivals, whether it is the Urs of Baba Bulleh Shah in Kasur in Punjab, music has played a very strong sort of an influence. And how do you reckon this influence of music post 1947, has it helped in any way in generating or in continuing this veneration for the Sufi saints? What role does music play? If you could.
Would you want me to respond?
Okay.
No, music does play, because this is one kind of medium which was prominently used for keeping alive the memory of pre-partition era. In fact, there was a continuous flow or piracy, I would say, of music production in Pakistan into India. And you would hardly come across shrine where Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan would not be played.
Of course.
A lot of Sindhi music that came.
Lot of
from
Sindhi music.
Rajasthan.
Yes, in a similar way.
All these, whether Hansraj Hans, you talk about Noora sisters of late, Nakodar mein.
Yes.
Everyone is.
These are newer interventions, but I'm talking about the continuities from the other side.
Other side, right.
So these continuities from the other side continue to play a significant role. And when I was teaching in Amritsar, there were specific shops that where you go, you'll get Pakistani music productions. You could easily buy and buy them. This was before the internet revolution had come, remember? So we could go and buy music from Pakistan in those set of shops. So, and there was huge circulation of it. Then there was the pirated, and all Sufi shrines in India would invariably play music from Pakistan. And these cassette covers would have, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Actually, I devoted a chapter to look at the flow of, cassettes and their covers and their, CDs and DVDs covered in the later phase. How their circulation also kind of inscribed the popular memory which was from pre-partition era. But what is also important, which is the point that you are trying to make here, is that there was also a continuous presence of, despite the fact that a lot of, gharanas from Punjab migrated to Pakistan, a lot of them. Despite that, music survived. And the reason for that is complex. One of the reasons was because music was always associated strongly with Sufi shrines. They were centers of music production and music festivals. You did have Hindu shrines also doing that. You had Sufi-Saint Veneration at Devi Talab Mandir in Jalandhar, say for instance, one of the important ones, Radha Kapoor has worked on that. But then Sufi shrines were one of the important centers of Qawwali here. So, and invariably anybody wanting to learn music would want to perform Qawwali. Similarly, you see Jagratas, which have become more prominent now. A lot of music, people who come from music industry have had performed at some or other Jagrata in Punjab, if they are coming from Punjab. Because these are places where you will practice music, you will master music, you will be known as a musician. But Sufi shrines were particularly interesting because a lot of these musicians, as you very rightly said, Hansraj Hans, Gurdas Man, were associated with Nakodar based shrine. These are Qadri shrines in and around Jalandhar region. And they become, and not just that actually, they were very recently, Gurdas Man also entered into controversy, but also his long association with Ladi Shah and Lal Badshah, the shrine which is situated there, about it continuously, because he started to claim his inheritance to one of these shrines. I don't remember which one, Lal Badshah or Ladi Shah. Ladi Shah. Okay, Ladi Shah's. But then some of the existing caretakers started to contest his claim because you never come here. You're all busy doing performances. Then he formally gives up his claim and some other such as the machine or caretaker was appointed to this shrine. But these associations are very strong. And these places have produced a lot of musicians, and Yunan sisters are known as much for Qawwali as much for, you see, a Bakerite music, say, for instance. So
primarily because of Qawwali, which
yes,
got them into limelight in Bollywood and others.
and a lot of new age Dalit musicians have emerged in the process. You had Qawwali performers emerging in all parts of the small shrines. And absence of Muslim musicians was one of the reasons that they could occupy that space and emerge as music composers and music performers. So the shrine once again played a very important role, because if you look at the process through which the rejuvenation of the shrine takes place, one of the things which, if I can kind of put it in a cyclic process, but then this is not a pattern which is followed everywhere, but one of the things which will happen obviously is our Thursday visitations. The second thing will happen is celebration of Urs. But in addition to these, you see, Urs and in addition to Urs, you had Qawwali actually prominently coming in many of these places where the practices were rejuvenated. And Qawwali expanded like anything.
So it worked both ways, in the sense that while the shrines helped these young Qawwals grow,
yes,
the Qawwals also helped these shrines.
Absolutely. And therefore, you today have barely would come across a shrine which today doesn't celebrate Qawwali, even in rural areas. So it's a huge business of Qawwali, therefore, in all parts of Punjab. Local Qawwals, they're not even coming from outside of Punjab, all local. You did have surviving Qawwals from Malayakotla, and who continue to function there. We have official Qawwals and several of these Qawwals, but I'm not talking about them. You have Qawwals, new Qawwals emerging in all parts of Punjab.
And even if not Qawwals, for instance, someone like Kamar Garewal, I saw Kamar Garewal here.
Yes.
So he's the new
Absolutely.
sort of star.
Yes, new age musicians singing Punjabi music outside of the genre of Qawwals. They're all emerging from shrines. They are very central. They sing at shrine, they perform at shrine. That's how also they gain popularity and also continue to the association with these shrines.
With Sabarkoti and all.
There are many of them. So this is one of the, you're right actually pointing out.
Just one, before I open it to everyone, just one small question. If you say that syncretism is perhaps not a sufficient enough model to understand the nature of the shrines, would you reckon Punjabiyat would be a sufficient enough model to, I don't know, I mean, if you differentiate between, let's say, syncretism and Punjabiyat, or if you think there's a difference in...
You see, again, Punjabi, the way it has been understood and inscribed, it has mostly been done through linguistic models, which means language becomes contour like the way Bengali becomes. So, Bengaliness is defined vis-a-vis Bangladesh and becomes one of the contour where the Bengalis can communicate. And similarly, Punjabi as a language has been inscribed as one of the mediums, and a lot of scholars have worked on that particular dimension. But I do reckon with that idea, but I would say it's not just a linguistic idea. If you have to use this as a category to be able to explain the process it defines Punjabi, you'll have to look at social contours. You'll have to look at the way, remember, the possibilities of these encounters. And remember, these possibilities of encounter are not peace encounters. You had terribly violent periods when encounters emerged. One of the popular story that I may quickly want to narrate is about Guru Gobind Singh's two sons. Captured by Nawab of Sindh. Two of his elder sons had already been killed by in this process because of the huge conflict between the Sikhs and the Mughals. The two younger sons were captured. Nawab of Malayakotla protested that they should not be executed. Sindh Nawab said, you better kill these two sons of Guru Gobind Singh, because Guru Gobind Singh killed your own two sons of yours. So Sher Muhammad Khan's two sons were killed by Guru Gobind Singh during battles with Guru Gobind Singh, which he asked, Wazir Khan asked Sher Muhammad Khan to avenge by killing the younger sons of Guru Gobind Singh. He refused. Both of them were allied to Mughals. Remember, Nawab of Malayakotla as well as Nawab of Sindh. But when it came to question of two younger sons of Guru Gobind Singh, he refused to kill them. Although Nawab of Sindh had, you see, axe to grind against Guru Gobind Singh, he brings them alive. A tale popularly remembered in Punjab as Saka Sarhind. And in Punjabi you call it Sarhindi Diwar. And that's a kind of narrative which is used, very powerful narrative about how these two young sons are killed, how they kind of refused to convert to Islam and then kind of become repository of faith. And remember, Indian government had used this particular tale to declare the Veer Bal Divas in the Indian calendar. You would know it. These two sons we are talking about. Important thing is that Guru Gobind Singh recognized this gesture of Sher Muhammad Khan. And apparently in the popular memory is that Guru Gobind said that your roots will always remain alive. He said this to Sher Muhammad Khan. To the extent when Banda Bahadur enters Punjab from Nanded to avenge the killing of these two sons, he devastates Sirhind. He demolishes Sheikh Ahmed Sindhi's shrine. He demolishes every single mosque there. He flattens the fort of Sirhind, but he doesn't touch Malay Kotla. You see? And after that, Malay Kotla Nawab refuses to fight battles against the Sikhs. But the chance encounter is because Aurangzeb thereafter dies. You see, Guru Gobind Singh also died. Within a span of 2-3 years, both Aurangzeb and Guru Gobind Singh died. But the memory remains alive. And this is one of the fundamental reasons that Malay Kotla refuses partition and that Sikhs spared Malay Kotla of devastation. And today Sikhs and Hindus go in large numbers to Malay Kotla. Remember this day. So what I'm trying to say here is there are always chance encounters. Syncretism doesn't explain this. It's not by design that you have to come together, your love has to be kind of blossomed or you have to forgive your differences. No, it's not all that. There is an organic process and there are chance encounters in that historical process which is leading, and these are heightened periods of conflict. These are encounters which explain why these shrines continue to exist. And in majority of these shrines in South Punjab, as I was referring to these khanqahs of Agrawal Samaj, the shrines that they dedicate, all of them are dedicated to Baba Lakhdata and you see Malekotla, Sheikh Hadar. And they all remember this tale. All of them in their inscribed this tale.
Okay, now I open up the.
You have Rajan actually
questions.
raising hand online.
Okay, Rajan has a question, then Manoj has a question perhaps. Yep. So Rajan, can you
Let them.
Rajan?
Am I audible?
Yes, Rajan.
Hi, Yogesh. Very fascinating, as usual, I should say. I was thinking to recall that similar conference we organized. We're talking of a shrine in Tamil Nadu, using this idea of porous background. So I'm just wondering whether it would be useful to isolate the notion of sacred as both mobile and porous across religions, across domains of secularity, social life, profanity, whatever. The sacred is the kind of a mobile notion that can be mobilized at various moments differently. As a kind of a countervailing force to kind of violence we're talking about, like killing of the historical memory or whatever. So the sacred is a kind of a bomb that can be used, to suit many a wound. So is that the kind of notion that you think will work in these kinds of context? That how this sacred can be detached, mobile, and made porous to accommodate all these kinds of things, so on. Rather than, as you rightly said, not simply syncretic. So I'm wondering whether this kind of a notion of mobile and porous temporality would work in this context.
Thank you, Rajan. Let's take them together because then we'll. Manoj?
Yes, sir. Is I audible?
Yes, Manoj.
Thank you so much, sir, for this valuable paper on Punjabi value and how has been shaped the social and political experience. Sir, my question is very clear. Is there any comparative data or primary sources on the condition of Hindu and Sikh community in Western Punjab, particularly Lahore and Rawalpindi region, and specific of Punjabi-speaking community after partition, specifically regarding their displacement and the subsequent occupation of their villages, mohallas, residential spaces? How does this compare to the experience of Muslim in East Punjab as reflected in the transformation of social group religious spaces? मतलब वहाँ पर जाने के बाद वहाँ पार्टीशन के बाद किस तरीके के विस्थापन मतलब इस तरीके के देखे जा सके इस पंजाब के अंदर और comparatively. So is there any primary sources? So this is I to share the question based on the text.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add mine because it overlaps with Rajan? So, you know, the establishment of the nation establishes a practice within which kind of temporality is subsumed to territorial reality. And the inauguration, in a way, of what Benjamin describes as, you know, empty homogeneous time. But what was really incredibly kind of fascinating in your account is how do practices, which, you know, should logically be subsumed under the idea of kind of secular time, resist being, you know, subsumed. And so here, I mean, what I really kind of had in mind was Anand Taneja and his work on ruins in Delhi and Firozshah Kotla has an argument of what he describes as the genealogy, with a play on the word jinn. And the argument there seems to be that here is an instance in which there is a stubbornness to what Rajan has described as the sacred, where this collision of two temporalities that coexisted between the domain of the secular and sacred time is instantiated through the idea of the ruin, which remains something which is damaged but not destroyed by the idea of national time. And it's that resurrection of, you know, forms of memorial practices that allows in a way for a kind of a resurrection of a different kind of, you know, instantiation of secular time within the domain, I mean, of sacred time within the domain of the secular. So it's kind of course, also deeply ironical, and I was very interested in your critique of the, you know, kind of almost cheap syncretism, where something like Sufi practice has become the ultimate kind of, you know, lodestone savior for secularists, right? Because of the fear of the right. And yeah, so, but the question, of course, that would then remain is, but what else? I mean, how else do you also then, you know, kind of contest the right, if not through clinging on to the last vestiges of some idea of syncretism? So I'm curious about how these two kind of, you know, registers actually come together.
Can I?
So one line. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. Like, mine is a very simple question. What is veneration like in pre-partition Punjab? Because today, looking at this, of course, like looks a little new, because these caretakers emerge as the new leaders or the drivers of the shrine. So this is not exactly a rupture; there's a continuity, because they are picking up their memorial traditions. But like, should we look at it as just a continuity or a new social formation? Because how can we differentiate with the veneration in pre-partition time? Like, because of course partition inevitably figures in all this. So yeah.
So as you rightly pointed out, your paper is titled in point of departure of syncretism, and it is, you know, predicated on Northwestern formulations. So I happened to read this article, this introduction by Samira Sheikh about forging a region. She talks about Gujarat. So I found it peculiar. Is it peculiar to Northwestern India? Because in the case of Gujarat, she talks about, you know, coming of pastoralists, trading communities and chieftains, and they later formed Rajput identity. So is there something peculiar about Northwestern India, including Gujarat, Punjab, and Maharashtra territory? Because there is, you know, hordes of, not invasion, incursions of people, and there are, you know, constant dilemma and constant discourse between people of different groups, because there is also ongoing trade. So is the point of departure of your syncretism is predicated on Northwestern formulation? What makes Northwestern India that peculiar? And the second question is, again, I couldn't, you know, get the idea of, you know, chance encounters of syncretism. So could you please elaborate on that? That's it.
Okay, I have roughly 8 minutes to respond to all these questions. Rajan, thank you very much for that question. You see, there have been different kinds of terminologies used to explain this process, and we had actually a kind of complete school of thought in the West, particularly because shrines have not been studied in Indian context as much as they have been an arena of study in the Western context. And you have dozens of scholars working in the context of the Middle East, of Eastern Europe, who have dedicated their lives to draw models to be able to understand the complexity of shrines and their spaces. So, and therefore, in addition to porous sacrality, I can actually kind of draw a longer genealogy of terms which have been used by scholars to explain this process, and they're numerous. However, you're right when you say that sacrality in itself is porous. It is the problem of scholarship that it looks at sacrality as a kind of a fixed, entity. However, by definition, and I call not just sacrality, but also religion and religious spaces, religious practices are inherently, porous. The problem is that we look at these processes in a very narrow silo of few decades. When you expand the spectrum to a period across a century or more, you see religious tradition fundamentally getting transformed. If you look at Hinduism of today and compare it with Hinduism of 1925 or 1924, you would see radical differences in the practices of Hinduism of today and Hinduism of then. Not just in terms of technologies of Hinduism of today, which means loud music and this and that. I'm not talking about that. But also fundamental nature of the practices. They are different. Century across the times, we have seen Hindu practices getting fundamentally, which means, if I want to bring one of these examples, in 1925 in Amritsar emerged a new temple. And this temple was constructed by the disgruntled Hindus who were thrown out of Golden Temple premises because they were performing pujas and archanas in and around Golden Temple complex. And they're very perturbed by insult by the Sikhs to the Hindus. So they kind of imagine a counter shrine, which is known as Durgana complex in Amritsar. A complete replica of Golden Temple, except it's some basic structure. It's also situated in the midst of it. Pond, approached by a causeway, with the shrine right inside the pond. But the only difference is that in the case of Golden Temple, you have possibility of circumambulation around the Granth, which means Granth occupies the central place, and you have these spaces open on all the floors like a Shiva temple. Because Shiva temple, typically because of its central location, which means the linga can be accessed from all the four sides. Shiva linga shrine usually are open from all the four sides. In that context, Golden Temple therefore follows that particular kind of model trajectory. But that is not the case with Durgana. Durgana is like a typical modern temple because here you have these deities kept in the right front and a mix of deities. If you look at temples of Amritsar before 1925, all of them are exclusive temples. You have Radha Vallabh temple, you have Shivala, Veerpan, exclusive shrines dedicated to exclusive deities. But in 1925 in Amritsar, you see the emergence of a huge temple complex where all the deities somehow come together. For the first time. In Amritsar, it didn't happen earlier. You don't have any other shrine where all the deities are placed together. You didn't have place for deities in the periphery of the central deity, typical to a temple complex. But in 1925, you have imagination of a temple, all the deities are together. So what I'm trying to say here is, as Rajan rightly pointed out, religion inherently is transforming process, and if you look at it longitudinally, you would be able to identify the trajectories of the shifts that these go through, and therefore essentially porous. But that doesn't explain the process that I was trying to understand, because in that porosity you also have violence in that porosity which defies logics of associations. And that logic of association can also only be explained through the historical process with which these memories function. So recourse to memory therefore has a particular trajectory. And these trajectories and recourse to memory defy the logic. In fact, in the case of khanqahs, to respond to probably some of the other example questions which have been raised by Harsha, whether there is a continuity or newness. There is a continuity in certain cases. Like Pirkhana shrines were always in existence in pre-partition times also. Constructed exclusively by the Baniya community. In fact, in 2000, few years ago, in 2013, 2023, I received an email from a person who was studying at the University of Cambridge from Punjab. He was pursuing law. And he wrote an email, oh, I encountered your book and it is such a relief that I have found your book, because I was going mad explaining that the Baniya community in Punjab celebrates Sufi shrines and construct temples and organize chowkis for Sufi mystics. And he was finding it impossible to explain to his friends and colleagues that that is the way his community functions. As against our imagination of the business communities as being communal, BJP oriented, you see, we have all these set of constructions about remember the urban, you see, business community. That is not what I encountered. That is what he didn't encounter. And to be able to explain that, you have to get, because there are process of, in fact, Pir Khana's shrine I went to, always there was this dream encounter that they will refer to. Okay, post-partition they stopped these practices. The one day, his mother gets a dream. In which dream, the Pir tells to the mother, why did you stop lighting a diya at my shrine? And then the mother shares it with his son and the son reinvokes the practice. You see, there is a recourse to memory because the memory exists and the recourse to memory help re-establish the continuity. But then there is newness also, as I said in the case of Kalam Sharif, the fact that you have suddenly a Ramayana appearing, you have Guru Granth Sahib appearing in the shrine premises, was not a case in the pre-partition era. Those rooms with those set of space didn't exist. They obviously post 1947 manifestation. But then there also has to be explained the process with which these shrines exist. Now the village is predominantly Sikh. The people who predominantly come there are predominantly Sikh and Hindu. As against the pre-partition milieu where the village was completely Muslim. So there is definitely a newness, and therefore many of these spaces also have been imagined in a very contemporary context. But then the recourse to memory is always central to even in these imaginations. Why is it that inscribed? As I already told you, there is a mound associated with Ramayana legend. There is a story associated with Guru Gobind Singh. All these come together to be able to also reimagine some of these processes. So therefore, there are certain things which get destroyed. There are certain things which get damaged, but not completely destroyed in the process, as Lawrence was pointing out. And there's a very interesting shrine that I encountered. It's actually on the Indo-Pak border. It used to be a shrine of a Jat Vaishnav. Let me not call him Vaishnav, a Jat Sadh, Jat ascetic, but not an ascetic of that kind. But he was also married. He was basically a langot wearing ascetic. Interestingly, the caretakers of the shrine, particularly during the period of militancy, they had a huge pressure because you see, all that area was affected by militancy. You had huge pressure of the militancy discourse. He transforms the identity of Baba Jalan, who is the figure that I am talking about, from a langot wearing to a fully covered, cloth wearing figure. And there was a pressure on the shrine to construct a gurdwara premises inside. So what they do, they destroy the tapsthan, or the place of meditation of Baba Jalan, who was a contemporary of the Sikh Gurus, by the way, living Gurus, historically recorded. Destroy it and construct a gurdwara in the name of one Sikh Guru, not Baba Jalan. And Guru Granth Sahib is inscribed there. But post the militancy, you see, that very caretaker brings in a correction to the discourse. How? They said, I think what we did to Baba Jalan was wrong. So, reversal of, you see, the representation of Baba Jalan takes place. His langot wearing figure re-emerges. And the tapsthan which was destroyed is restored, though the Gurdwara cannot be destroyed any longer. But tapsthan, the corner part, therefore gets restored. So,
but what happens to the Granth Sahib? It's there.
Granth Sahib is still here. But the place is now known as Baba Jalan Gurdwara. So what I'm trying to say here is, when you look at the historical process, you do have difficult moments in the political history of regions, spaces, where our shrine also transform because of all kinds of reasons. But then there is also a reverse possibility of reversal, possibility of, you see, referring back to the memory of those spaces, and therefore, very rightly pointed out by Lawrence, it probably, some bit of it get damaged in the process, but not completely destroyed, and therefore this is recourse to the past, that possibility which emerges. Now, how do you really explain this in the Pakistan context, as Manoj was pointing to us? Unfortunately, we don't have as many studies on the Sikh shrines in Pakistan today, except for one huge documentary which has been produced by an entrepreneur based in Singapore. He imagined a huge, he actually, with his own money, went across spaces in Pakistan, Afghanistan, documents the Sikh gurdwaras there, in Sindh, in Iran, in Iraq. He travels to places where Guru Nanak apparently goes, where Sikh shrines exist, and documents their state today. Except for that, and he then produced 2 big volumes which he gifted, one of the set to me. Except for these 2, we actually don't have any other significant work which documents what happens to these spaces in Pakistan. And there obviously needs to be scholarship. We do have examples of, as I said, restoration of Katastral, an important, you see, Hindu shrine in Pakistan, which is visited by desolate pilgrims. But there is not much work, so we don't know the story on that side. But however, as I said, with every subsequent political conflict between India and Pakistan, with every single conflict within India between Hindus and Muslims, you do have these repercussions in Pakistan, and we know during the Babri Masjid movement, Ram Jamm movement, when Babri Masjid was destroyed, we know several temples in Pakistan were destroyed, historical temples, because all of them were Partition temples, Jain temples, Hindu temples were destroyed. So we do hear about those contours, but whether or not efforts have been made to restore them. I did come across few of the cases of temples which today function as schools or institutions, but whether or not they survived partition, one doesn't know that. Mosques in Indian Punjab definitely didn't survive, predominantly didn't survive. We do have some examples of mosques surviving, which are historical in some association with so Guru Nanak, say for instance, in Sultanpur Lodi, we do have one mosque which was restored. Some individual efforts in villages in Punjab where mosques were restored because of immigrant Muslims coming and living in Punjab, migrant basically, who were workers, who were farm laborers. But we don't have huge evidence of them continuing to function.
Even in Malay Kotla would be an
Malay
exception.
Kotla is an
Would be
exception.
an exception.
Is an exception, where madrassas continue to function, where shrines continue to be endowed. Everywhere else, mosques definitely slowly and gradually disappeared. They got to be used for something else. But shrines were exceptions, Sufi shrines were exceptions. Therefore, their continuity, because of the historical process, as I'm saying, also becomes a unique case study for us to understand. So, Manoj, therefore, we do have one major source. I can recommend you that. I have a copy of the book, and this huge project it runs, Walking with Nanak. If you can look at the website of this man who's produced dozens of video footage on the shrines that he documented in Pakistan, predominantly gurdwaras, but sometimes also temples that he also covered. So I hope I have been able to respond. Ayush, yes. I can't really quickly respond to that, but you're right when you say there is something unique about western, northwestern part of India because of the unique trajectories of agrarian transformation or economic transformation, because these spaces were predominantly pastures. At certain juncture, they get transformed from the pastoral to a more settled life, and that shift and transformation also defines, and it's roughly around the same time. These shifts and transformation also defines their encounter with religious traditions, and therefore desert, rivers, you see Sufi lore in terms of cycles of seasons, a lot of these commonalities you exist in, and also the poetry, remember. In fact, Shah Abdul Latif is as popular in Punjab as much in Sindh. Bulle Shah is as popular in Punjab as much in Indian Punjab. So you do have these overlaps and remember Lal Shahbaz Qalandar is as much celebrated in Bollywood and Indian Punjab because it's a Sindhi Sufi otherwise. So these overlaps definitely exist, and probably these overlaps can be best understood also in this large space in the western frontier of India, which is defined by a particular kind of historical process and influences, and which shape how also they get shaped.
They were cosmopolitan historically in early medieval India.
There is definitely.
Because the coastal region always had, trade networks dating back to Arabia and Mediterranean. There are Geniza records, I was reading about it.
There's also multilingualism. You see,
there are Arabic settlements in Gujarat in 14th century. It's very intriguing. So is there any sort of similarity in Punjab also?
People have not
trade and political relations.
People have not worked on it, but apparently yes, there is a strong continuity. Because if I would give you an example of a small chapter that I wrote in the book that I published, in that chapter I explore this emergence of this Panchbir shrine in my hometown, the shrine that I referred to begin with. That students asked me to go, nudged me to go. Out of the 5, Panch means 5. Out of the 5 peers and mystics referred to in this lore, 2 are from Sindh. One of them is a mythical saint, Khwaja Khizr. Second is Lal Shahbaz Qalandar. Third is on the edge of Sindh and Punjab, Uch, Sayyid Lal Bukhari, Jalal Bukhari. And the fourth one is actually a Sohrawardi saint from Multan. And then the 5th is Baba Farid. So if you look at you see the spaces these 5 traverse, it was actually a trade route. And in fact, Ibn Battuta, when he enters India in the 14th century, India when I'm saying it, because he's entering into the territory of the Delhi Sultanate, he enters this hometown of mine, Abohar, and he mentions in his account that he had entered the first town of Hindustan, traveling the same route actually. And I was wondering, what is it that you have these traders, travelers, traveling the same route, treacherous route actually, because that is a time of Mongolian invasions, a huge uncertainty along the trade routes. But when you enter into the territory of the Delhi Sultanate, you feel secure. You invoke all the 5 that you met on the way. It's a memorial shrine. It has nothing to do with Sufi mysticism, lore and practices, large ideas of, remember, mystic, but nothing. It's actually a process of historical geography actually, which leads to emergence of this memorial shrine, which has nothing to do with anything else. Continue to survive, thrive. You have more than 2-3 lakh people who visit during the Mela, which is organized at this shrine during monsoons. So what I'm trying to say here is that you have to look beyond the given models to be able to understand the existence of Sufi shrines and their practices in contemporary Indian Punjab. And I have tried to use multiplicity of models to explain that process. Memory is one, dreams are other, historical geography is yet another model that I try to make use of to be able to explain that process. Obviously there could be more models to be able to do that, but it's a complex spaces. As against therefore places which were, and that's what historical scholarship did. They only studied spaces which were known for, and the example that I gave today was also one of those, where you knew that the Sufi mystics existed. So which means he lived there, he was buried there, and a mausoleum or a dargah was constructed there. What about thousands of such other shrines where we don't know anybody existed or not? Historical scholarship called them fake shrines. You see, fictitious shrines. By calling them fake and fictitious, actually they ripped off a possibility of, charting the historical process of their evolution.
Is it by the virtue of them not being buried there that it's called?
Yes, because Punjab had a lot of memorial shrines. That's what I'm saying. You go to Baba Malerkotla shrine, pick up a handful of sand from there, bury in your neighborhood, construct a small cenotaph or a kind of a dargahs, and the practice will thrive. That's what is, you see the process now. Or you have memory which inscribe the process. As I said, the 5 P's. You have a notice of a shrine taking place. And this is very rampant in Punjab. That's how these spaces emerge. It's not about living Sufis that I'm trying to talk about as much, but it's also of memory that plays an important role in inscribing these processes. So that's the way I would want to respond to.
Any last bits? We are already running out of time. One last question, if that's
Yes,
possible.
2. If you can make them short.
Very short last 2 questions, please.
Yes.
Okay, so the one is in the context of Kartarpur corridor.
Yes.
So we see that Sikhs particularly, I mean Kartarpur corridor, Kartarpur Sahib Gurdwara is of course one of the main shrine, and can we think about the veneration of Sufi shrines, or maybe the restoration of these Sufi shrines in the Indian Punjab as some sort of a bargaining chip that the community holds, so that they can maybe, I don't know, bargain with the Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, that they are
Bargaining chip for what? To visit some other place?
Yeah, that there, there's this community who are not just restoring these, shrines, but also are, maintaining peace. So, the other side should also let them visit these sites. Other than this, I have this, in my own field work, I visited, I talked to some of the people in Uttarakhand, and we know that, there's this trope of dargah jihad going on, right? So people, particularly from the one Gujjar community, told me that prior to this, this narrative that's built on, around the community spreading in Uttarakhand, they said that
Which community is spreading?
The Muslim community.
Okay.
Sorry. They said that it's earlier people used to live in peace. They thought that these Sufi shrines or other dargahs were actually kind of is a projection of or a representation of secular culture. But now that they are aware of that the Muslim community is spreading, these very shrines or sites have become sites at which hatred could be projected.
Yes, yes. A lot of these conflicts are much more.
And we also know that the Muslim community is 14% in Uttarakhand, which is not the case in Punjab, right? It's just 1 or 2%.
Yes, very few.
So does the percentage of the Muslim population have anything to do with how the sites are looked at, maybe restored, venerated, whatever?
It's a difficult question to respond. And somebody was asking me one day in some other conference, what if the same process, partition would not have happened? What if partition would not have happened? Would the Sufi shrines, the way they exist today in the Western Punjab, how would they have existed? Which means in presence of Muslim population, dominant Muslim population. Now it's very difficult to respond to that particular question, because if you look at Pakistan, say for case for instance, in the last 2 decades, things have now become more peaceful in the last 1 decade, but in the first decade of the 21st century, all the shrines that I have referred to in my presentation in Pakistan were bombed. Sakhisar shrine was bombed. Lal Shahbaz Kabir shrine was bombed. Baba Farid shrine was bombed. Several shrines in Lahore were bombed. So we know that there exists a strong sentiment against, Sufi practices in Pakistan. Though Pakistan state institutionalizes Sufism because it is under state control. Remember, like Turkey, you have a lot of these shrines in Pakistan which function with state patronage. Despite that, you have rise of radicalism in Pakistan of an extent where Ahmadis cannot exist as, they can't even offer Muslim prayer, remember. Ahmadi community in Pakistan, recently a case has been filed against few Ahmadis who were offering namaz during rozas. They were not supposed to eat rozas. Just imagine the context and contour in Pakistan state today. If in that context these Sufi shrines were to function, I don't know how would they have existed and survived. So partition does create a new kind of condition, at least in the Indian Punjab's case, where there is a possibility of recourse to memory on the one hand, but also the possibility which the new nation state offers. You see? And therefore, some of the values of the new nation state play a very important role also in survival of these practices in different unique ways, which I can't really explain how in different unique ways. And therefore, probably these contexts and contours continue to function in this space. Now, as I said, Gangetic place is a very different zone, and Uttarakhand is part and parcel of that process. And it's very difficult for me to articulate because now Pakistan movement is emerging from there. Pakistan movement doesn't emerge from Punjab, despite the fact that it had dominant Muslim population pre-partition. Punjabis didn't demand partition. It is Jinnah from, remember, UP area where Muslims were in minority actually demanded partition. Until 1945, 43 actually, we were not sure that partition will actually take place because Jinnah was demanding a province for him where he was unable to win seats. Until 1943, remember. So what I'm trying to say here is, you see, historically, if you look at this large zone, the northwestern, it definitely is a different zone, both historically, but also because of a particular juncture of, you see, its politics. It experienced different kind of restructuring, both pre and post partition. And therefore, it's very difficult for me to articulate and use the models being used here in the case of Uttarakhand. I can't do that because it will be difficult for me to do that because these spaces are unique, and therefore I use this category of the space to be able to define that. What constitutes that space, we'll be able to understand what kind of historical process gets instituted in that particular space. So Kartarpur is one of the way actually to respond to Manoj is one of those cases, and Manoj is no longer here, where the Pakistan state takes interest in, you see, opening up a corridor to be able to, for an access to the Punjabis on this side to the shrine in Pakistan. So, and there could more, you could be Nankana also, which came in future. And obviously there used to be a bus which used to go to Nankana, and all of these things, these buses have stopped actually. In Amritsar, when I used to teach there, a bus stand was constructed right in front of my eyes, which is known as International Bus Stand, where bus from Delhi would stay over, and from there it would go to Lahore. To Lahore actually, from bus to Lahore. Now it has all stopped. So those possibilities obviously are immense, but how do they function within a given nation state context, one doesn't know. And therefore, as I said, Amritsar constitutes of three places: the Sikh consciousness, the nationalist consciousness, the consciousness of the nationalist movement, and the contemporary Indian state context. All three coexist in that space. And how do you make sense of these coexistences? Obviously, it's for a scholar to decode that. So, Riddhi had a question.
I just wanted to understand how do we handle cases of contestation in spaces like these? And if not, I'm also curious to know if there were any claims to these spaces from a very specific religious identity point of view. And if not,
which spaces?
The shrines that you mentioned, because you're also saying that there's a part of where Guru Granth Sahib is kept, and there's also a Ram statue there. So I wanted to understand, were there any legal contestations over claims over these spaces?
They do keep emerging. I'll give you not example of this shrine, but in my hometown you have the Panjpit that I referred to. So, because all of them are Waqf properties, just remember that. If you look at the propriety of these shrines, it has with the Waqf board. They are basically Waqf board properties. and all of them pay rent to Waqf board. You should also know that. Annual rent to Waqf board. In fact, there emerged a conflict in with Panjpir Shrine, my hometown, where Waqf board one day all of a sudden gave, you see, the rent paying, signed a rent paying agreement with the name of a new caretaker who didn't belong to the Kambo community who were earlier inheritors of this shrine, who claimed, okay, we are from Pakpatan, we always visit this shrine, there was a historical association, even pre-partition, and all that is inscribed in that particular space. But had to take back that rent agreement when Kambo offered a higher price. Okay, we will pay this price, but don't take away the shrine maintenance from us. And it came back to Kambo, and they started paying the equal rent that another party offered to pay. So you need to understand the unique dynamics. So on the one hand, you have historical process, you have the continuities, which can be clearly explained, and I've been rubbished by several scholars at several occasions. Oh, this is just political. दुकान है, तो दुकान तो चलानी है, पर दुकान सिर्फ सूफी श्राइन है, मंदिर की दुकान है, गुरुद्वारा में दुकान है, सब में गोलक होती है. So you can't explain political economy only in the case of Sufi shrines. You can't use that context only here. Then you use everywhere. Because that is just one context within which they function and survive. Even before Waqf board came in picture, remember, and the shrine were taken over formally by them, shrine had already become alive. That context, who will explain that context? And I'm talking about period before the Waqf board coming into prominence in Punjab region. Shrine starting to function and emerge during that time. So there is a complexity, there are contestations. But then historical claims sometimes play an important role. As I said, in your context in this case, the Kambo family who was controlling the shrine since the 1947, their claim prevailed as compared to the claim of some other person who said I will offer a higher price. So in that context, remember that process once again gets instituted, and these disputes are adjudicated through other social processes, not necessarily the legal process, and we try to understand.
So you said that understanding these spaces through a very syncretic understanding would be a romanticization of the
Yes,
process.
yes.
I wanted to understand, so can we say that these spaces were isolated from the larger religious constructions that were happening?
No, they were not isolated. Don't believe in that, because, as I said earlier, all these are part and parcel of the same process. What did you mean by isolated?
Isolated as in, like you gave the example of Golden Temple where
Okay.
the Hindus were taken off with the idols. So Yogesh Snehi says that the idol became a manifestation of broader religious identity.
No, they were not separate. I am again giving an example from the same shrine that I was referring to, Panjpir. You can clearly see a 16th century shrine premises which houses the 5 graves. Clearly 16th century premises. But then you can clearly also identify an early 20th century construction of a mosque, just adjacent to these 5 graves. Now, what explains this transition? What explains the emergence of a mosque? Obviously, globally, there was pressure on Sufi shrines to adhere to core Islamic practices and principles, and shrines was coming to it. In fact, you see, many of these shrines participated in partition. I should also emphasize that. Jinnah found inroads in Punjab through these very shrines and the Sadr, the machines, basically, the Khadims and Khalifas. They were the ones who gave a call for partition.
We can go out
And you need to understand that also. But remember, consciously, if you look at public memory, the public memory creates this clear distinction between politics and piety. When I went to the shrine at close to Ropar, known as I've forgotten the name of the shrine. It's very close to Ropar. The caretaker of the shrine clearly underlined, blamed Jinnah, and he's a Muslim. Blamed Jinnah for local Pwadi dialect. So dui pai di, that's what he says in Pwadi Punjabi. Ki inhone hi dui padhai, the binary between the Hindus, Sikhs on the one side and the Muslims, and he blames Jinnah for having done that. Now he's representing a shrine, remember. So what I'm trying to say here is, the contour immediately that emerges between the period 43 to 45 is very different from the historical contour. 43 to 47, sorry, is a phase which is identified by a lot of other complex processes which can't be reduced to the large historical. And there are several examples where historical memory goes back to inscribe shrine and their shrine practices, not their role in partition, remember. When they institute, and they are very localized tales and lore, and I'm saying, you don't have to look at large brand of historical processes, you look at some of smaller encounters to be able to explain those smaller processes.
So can we say that memory resists these?
It does. In most of these cases that I have worked on, memory resists the hegemonizing process because there is a political hegemony, no? But you see, Pakistan movement is a political hegemony, right? In a political sense. It resists that at several spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Just an additional. If you would allow.
One last observation.
Last observation. So what she said about shrines and what you told about khadins, Mr. Jilna is not the only one. The same thing goes in Kashmir when Sheikh Abdullah tries to mobilize Kashmiri Muslim community. I will quote Farjana Sheikh, though Chitralekha Jukshi, contends this. She has disagreements with Farjana Sheikh. Farjana Sheikh's work is Community and Consensus in Islam, Muslim Representation in Colonial India. The quote is, the very real value that Muslims themselves attach to the organization of their politics on grounds of religion and community is the force, because जिसकी वजह से शेख और खादिम जो हैं वो एक हब बन जाता है मुस्लिम मोबिलाइजेशनल पॉलिटिक्स का. तो शेख अब्दुल्ला ये कर रहे थे कश्मीर में, सिर्फ जिन्ना ब्रिटिश इंडिया में अकेले नहीं थे जो कर रहे थे खादिम से मुस्लिम को पॉलिटिसाइज करना. फरजाना शेख इस बात को कहते हैं.
Kashmir is a different example here because Kashmir Sufism is also very distinctive. You can't compare it with Punjabi Sufism, and it's a different brand of Sufism, remember that. Where, remember, religious authority of those who lead Muslim prayers in mosques also come from Sufi lineages. It's a very different space, remember. That is not the case with Punjab. In fact, if you look to Kashmir, you actually have to look at Iran as one of the models to look at these parallels, because Iran is a place where historically the rulers of the state were always Sufis. I'm talking about monarchies which existed earlier and the new models also. So sheikhs and Sheikh Jadas always were prominently, leaders in this process. So what I'm trying to say here is Punjabi Sufi mysticism is very different. The space is very different. And it needs to be understood through different lens. So there is a momentary phase that you try to see, but remember, you should also know that the fact that today we have emergence of a monolithic Hinduism that we talk about, in which Yogi Adityanath, who belongs to a very different genealogy of religious tradition, participating in the Sanatan process. It's a huge Sanatan process, remember? We are referring back to Sanatan, everything is Sanatan, no? Sanatan Hinduism. But that very religious tradition was on the back foot in the early 20th century. The same way Sufi shrines were on the back foot in the early 20th century, which was the rise of the Wahhabi Islam, the rise of Deobandi movement, with the rise of Ahmadi movement. All of them were beating Sufi shrines. In fact, they were on the back foot. Similarly, Nath practices were on the back foot. The hegemonic process of Sanatan Hinduism was arguing for, on the one hand you had Arya-Samajis who said, okay, this is all rubbish. And then you had Sanatanis who also called, remember, Nathpanthis and these Deras as fraudsters. Oh, Guradhanda is a word used. You need to understand in terms of historical process. And it is in these processes, remember, because of the milieu of survival, that you have on the one hand Sufi shrine going to Pakistan movement, and then you have Nath Panthis getting subsumed into the Sanatan process. And there is also a historical process explaining these genealogies. Obviously, there is no time to discuss them further. But there are larger historical processes within which you have to also explain some of these trajectories where they go finally. But then as partition happens, you have different imaginations.
So I was just pointing out that Mr. Abdullah was also using shrine as a space to mobilize Kashmiri Muslims.
He was.
Obviously, there was a difference.
But
between
Punjabi unionists were not doing that. The political party dominating Punjab, the landlord class, they had a party known as Unionist Party. It was dominated by Khizar Hayat Khan, and he was the most towering of the figure who said, we don't want partition. So the leadership which is demanding partition is not from Punjab, as against Kashmir example that you're doing Sheikh Abdullah. Here it's not the case. The Punjabi Muslims are not demanding partition. The demand is coming from the other side, and the vulnerables are picked for consolidating that demand, which are already on the back foot. The shrines are already on the back foot because Ahmadis are beating them, Deobandis are beating them, you have actually Jamaat-e-Islami beating them, Tablighi Jamaat beating them, everyone is beating them. You need to understand the complex of shrine practices during that era, and that explains why I remember this shift and transition takes place.
Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you once again.
See, it's always I'm always anxious to pick up this. Hello, Salim, how are you?
So if you have further more questions, you're most welcome. Yogesh is all yours after this is formally over. And thank you, Yogesh.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Salim, being around. Even Dennis was around. So.